Hi folks. I want to tell you a little story which I hope will help you remember the rules for doing electron configurations. So let me set the scene for you. We've got a motorcycle gang. They're a nice motorcycle gang. They want to buy stuffed animals at the local store. Now, because this is a nice motorcycle gang, they only park in designated parking spaces. They don't park illegally. They do like to park as close to the door as possible, so they don't have so far to walk. They can fit 2 motorcycles per parking spot, but they can only do that if they park the bikes in opposite directions so that the handlebars don't hit each other. Also, they don't double up the bikes until they have to. So if there is a parking spot that is equally far from the door, they will choose to park in an empty parking spot. It's easier to park in an empty parking spot than it is to squeeze your bike in next to somebody else's in the same parking space. So when the first motorcycle arrives, they go ahead and park close to the door with their handlebars at this end of the bike. But then when the second motorcycle arrives, again, they want to park as close to the door as possible, but they have to park their motorcycle pointing the other direction. When the third motorcycle arrives, this parking spot is totally full because it already has 2 motorcycles in it. So they still want to park as close to the door as possible. The only spot available is here in this parking space. Motorcycle 4 comes along and they can still park close to the door by doubling up in that parking space. When motorcycle 5 comes along, the closest 2 spots to the store are totally full. Motorcycle 5 parks here in this next bank of parking spaces. When motorcycle 6 comes along, they don't park right next to motorcycle 5 because it's easier for them to park in their own separate parking space than trying to squeeze their bike in next to the bike that's already there. Similarly, when motorcycle number 7 arrives, they can choose their own parking space that's the same distance from the door. They're not any further from the door, they just want their own space. After we have motorcycle number 7, motorcycle 8 can fit in here, motorcycle 9 can fit in here, motorcycle 10 can fit in here, and then that bank of parking spaces is full. We can continue this way. When there's only 1 parking space available, then you can only squeeze in 2 motorcycles. When there are 3 parking spaces available, then you can fit in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 motorcycles. Now, you can continue this pattern for as many motorcycles as you want to fit in there. But this is the general story, the general rule for parking these motorcycles into these parking spaces. So, in terms of explaining the rules, we're going to talk about 3 rules when it comes time to do electron configuration. Rule number 1 is the Aufbau principle. Electrons fill the lowest available energy sublevels first. That's just like us saying we want to park as close to the door as possible. Okay, we're going to fill up these parking spaces first before we fill up the further away parking spaces. Now, the order in which these fill is fixed, and you do need to memorize or find a way of remembering the correct order. This is actually going to come from what we've already learned about electron configurations, and I'll show you that with the periodic table. The second rule is called the Pauli exclusion principle. The Pauli exclusion principle says that 2 electrons in the same atom cannot have the same 4 quantum numbers. Therefore, if 2 electrons are in the same orbital, they must have opposite spins. Well, that's the same thing as saying those 2 motorcycles, if we park them in the same parking place, we need to park them with their handlebars pointing opposite directions. The third rule when we do electron configurations is Hund's rule. And Hund's rule says you place 1 electron per orbital before pairing electrons. That's not an issue when you're in an S-type orbital, but when you're in P or D type orbitals, where you have multiple orbitals that have the same energy, multiple parking spaces that are the same distance from the door, then those you don't double up until you have to. This was like saying the bikes each choose their own personal parking space until there's no other choice, and then they start to double up. Okay. So by telling this story, I was trying to relate this to a real world example where people like to park when they go shopping to help you remember the 3 important rules when you're doing electron configurations. I hope this helped.